basically the size of the grains, okay? So, did everybody just tend to get different times? What kind of times were we getting on this machine?
We have to use it for
15 seconds? When you press the timer, what time did you have when you got sick?
we have to use it for 30 seconds.
30 seconds, yeah,
Sure.
exactly. But did you get 30 seconds or did
No,
you get,
no,
what
no.
time did you have?
13.
13 seconds, yeah,
Sure.
exactly. And then on our machine, it was a lot of them, it started off kind of being, I think, 14 seconds, but then by the end it was kind of like, I think yeah, you got 30, yeah, exactly. And then there was a couple that were kind of more than 30. So basically what we're talking about is just changing the size of the grains of the coffee. That's what ground calibration is. So if the grains of coffee are too large, that means the water is going to travel faster through each grain of coffee, okay? And if the grains of coffee are too small, the water is going to take longer for the water is going to take longer to travel through the grains of coffee when the grains are too small. If you think about it, I'll just give you a small example. So let's say you have your two portafilters. One portafilter is filled with rocks or pebbles, and then the other portafilter is filled with grains of sand. Would the water travel faster through the side with the portafilter with rocks, or would it travel faster through the sand?
With the rocks faster.
With the rocks, exactly,
faster.
because the space in between each rock is larger, so that means there's less resistance, the water will travel faster. But if the one portafilter had grains of sand, like really, really small grains of sand, the water is going to take a long time to find or to channel its way through the grains of sand, and that's going to affect the time of the espresso, because it's going to take a lot longer. So that's what we're talking about when we're calibrating a grinder. We're just talking about the size of the grains of the coffee. So when our coffee grains are too large, we're going to call this a fast shot of espresso, because that means the water is traveling too quickly and it's too fast. That means if it's traveling too fast, that means it's going to be weak in flavour. And because the water hasn't taken enough time to absorb the flavours of the coffee grains, that means it's going to be weak in flavour. If you were to compare it to making a cup of tea, let's say you put a tea bag into a cup for 10 seconds, and then you put a tea bag into a different cup for 10 minutes, that means the flavour is going to be completely different. So you're going to have a weak cup of tea, and then you're going to obviously have a stronger cup of tea, depending on the length of time the tea bag has stayed in or a cup of tea. So it's fast, it's weak, and the flavour that you will taste from this espresso is going to be acidic. Does anybody know any acidic flavoured foods?
Lemon.
Lemons, yeah, exactly. So lemon would be a really acidic flavoured food, and it still would be bitter in flavour, like it's an espresso, so it would be bitter, but you would have a more acidic flavoured espresso. It also could be lighter in colour. So the colour of the espresso, if you were to compare it to an espresso that was extracted with smaller grains of coffee, the colour of it will be lighter in colour. Like I was saying, with the tea bag example, if you just dump the tea bag into the hot water for 10 seconds, it's going to be lighter in colour than if you were to leave the tea bag in there for 10 minutes. So it's fast because the water has travelled quickly through the grains of coffee. It's weaker in flavour because you haven't extracted or you haven't absorbed any or the majority of the flavour from the coffee grains. It's going to be acidic, so it's going to taste like lemons, it's going to have a sour taste, and it's going to be lighter in colour. So these grains of coffee, they are less than 28 seconds. So that's why it's really important that we're following our recipe, because if we're timing our shots of espresso, or if we don't time the shots of espresso, we actually don't know the flavour. So when we're looking at our times, maybe some people when they made their shots of espresso, they got less than 28 seconds. So you know that your espresso will be weak, acidic, and it's going to be light in colour. We also call this under extracted. So that means if it's less than 28 seconds, we call this an under extracted shot of espresso, because we haven't absorbed all the flavours from the grains of coffee, so that's why it's called under extracted. Now, when the grains of coffee are too small, that means we're going to call this a slow shot of espresso because, like I was saying, the water has travelled too slowly through the grains of coffee because the size of the grains are too small and you're extracting a lot of flavour, a lot of fibre from the coffee grains. It's going to be really strong, really intense, really bitter in flavour. It's going to have a burnt kind of taste and it's really unpleasant to drink. It's going to be bitter and then it's going to be darker in colour as well. So it's the complete opposite to our 28-second shot of espresso. So when the grains of coffee are too small, it's going to be slow because water travelled too slowly. It's going to be stronger in flavour because the water took too long to travel through the grains of coffee, so you're absorbing a lot of fibres from the coffee grains, and that's going to give it that really bitter, burnt flavour. Does anybody know any bitter flavoured foods?
Bitter.
Something really bitter.
Mustard, no.
Which?
Mustard.
Mustard? Mustard, yeah, that would be
Yeah,
bitter,
mustard.
actually, yeah. The example that I would usually give is...
Pepper, like pepper. Yes.
Yeah, or even, does anybody like dark chocolate?
Yes.
Yeah, so dark chocolate with like 80% cocoa, that's a bitter flavoured food, so it's dark chocolate, and it's nice and bitter. Some people really like bitter flavoured foods, other people, they don't enjoy it as much. But we call this shot of espresso over-extracted.
Там нету
So it's
какой-то
gonna be more than-
пеппер какой-то.
More than 32 seconds, because it's taken too long, and yeah, it's going to be really burnt and bitter, and it's going to be really dark in colour, and that's because the grains of coffee are too small. Now, when we talk about the correct size grains, so we have our 16 grams in our basket, and the time is going to be between 32 to 28 seconds, and we call this proper extraction. Because the grains of coffee were the correct size, the space in between each grain of coffee allowed the water to travel through at 30 seconds, and then you absorb the acidic flavours and you absorb the bitter flavours, and then that's why you get the balance of the two. So if you get a balance when you have your acids and bitters, because you want both in your cup at the same time, both in your espresso, to get a balance of the flavours. So that's why it's really important that we are following our recipe and we're timing our shots of espresso, because we obviously, the timing of the shot of the espresso is going to tell us if it's too weak, if it's too strong, if it's too acidic, or if it's too bitter. Because you would never serve a shot of espresso to a customer that is less than 28 seconds or more than 32 seconds, because they would notice the difference in the flavour. And when people are ordering their coffee, they know what they like. So let's say a regular customer, they come in 5 days a week, and every time they come into the shop, they get a different flavoured espresso. Like, they're not going to come back after a while because they know that maybe somebody working there isn't following the recipe, or they don't understand that the size of the grains is like too big or too small. So that's why it's really important that you just have a level of consistency when we're working with espresso, because people wouldn't taste the difference. Now, when it comes to actually calibrating the grinder, it's pretty simple to calibrate. It's a little tedious at times because it's a lot over and back. Anna, what was the time on this machine?
Around 14-15 seconds.
14-15 seconds, okay. So 14-15 seconds, that means it's less than 28. So this grinder is currently under extracted, so it's running too fast, it's weak, it's acidic, it's light in colour. So that means we know that the grains of coffee coming from this grinder are too large. So what we want to do is we want to make them smaller. So when we're making them smaller, can everybody see this dial on the grinder? It's like, I don't know if anybody can see it over there as well. It's like a small little round dial. That's what we're going to use to either turn it to the right or to the left, and that's going to change the distance between the blades. Like Anna was saying at the beginning, there's two blades that are spinning in opposite directions inside your grinding chamber, and they're crushing and grinding the coffee for us. They're currently too far apart. So the blades inside our grinder, these are blades, they're too far apart. So that means the space in between each blade is too large. So when the beans fall down into a grinding chamber, there's a lot of space inside there, so they're being crushed or chopped, but they're not getting crushed and chopped enough, okay? So the grains are too big, and then that means the water's traveling too fast, okay? So what we want to do is we want to push the blades closer together. So when we're pushing the blades closer together, we want to get our dial, and we want to turn it to the right, in a clockwise direction. So it's like, you turn the wheel apart, you turn it to the right. Now, when everybody comes up, you will see that there's numbers along the dial here. The numbers are there just to guide you. You would never come in and say, oh, yesterday the dial was set on 4, I'm going to set the dial to 4 again today. Because what can happen with coffee is, coffee reacts differently to temperature, humidity, sunlight. So let's say yesterday was raining, it was really cold, the next day it's warm and with high humidity. Then that means the beans are going to react differently in our grinder, and they're going to travel either faster or slower through the grinding chamber, and that's going to give us grains of coffee that are going to be too large or too big. So we turn to the right. So turning it on 4, I'm going to move it just a couple of dots before 4. So it's currently what, maybe like 3.7. But now since I've moved, I pushed the blades closer together because I moved them to the right. So now the space in between each blade is smaller, so that means the grains of coffee are going to be smaller, okay? So if I make any adjustment to our grinder, I want to pull what I call a bow shot. A bow shot is just cleaning up the grinding chamber because the blades hold on to grains of coffee from the previous grind size, okay? So that means there's grains of coffee in between the blades that are currently too big, and I know they're too big because the shots of espresso were 14 seconds. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to clean up the grinder, pour the filter, and it stops automatically. I know these grains of coffee are too big, so that means they go into the bin. But the grains of coffee now that are inside the grinding chamber, because I moved the dial to the right, and because I pushed the blades closer together, the next shot of espresso that I pull, the grains of coffee are going to be smaller. Because the blades are close together, so that means they're going to be chopped a lot smaller. It's really difficult to notice. You wouldn't notice the size of the grains if you were to look at them. But obviously, when you extract your espresso and you look at the time will obviously tell you that we've moved the dial in the right direction. And then obviously, if you want to move it in the opposite direction, let's say for my machine over here, some people were getting grains of coffee that were too small, so the blades were too close together. So over here, we'll have to pull them in the opposite direction to pull them apart, to make them a little larger. Even though our last shot was 30 seconds, so it actually might be okay now, but I'll have another look at it and potentially we might make little adjustments. But that's all it is when we're calibrating the grinder. Pulling the blades further apart, pulling the blades further apart and pushing them closer together, and then that obviously will determine the time of the espresso. So the words that we're going to use for these grains of coffee, if they're too large, we're going to say it's too coarse. That's the word that we use in a coffee shop for instead of large and small. Large is coarse, and then when they're too small, we say it's fine. So like if you were to think fine grains of sand, fine grains of coffee, and then coarse is obviously just a little bit too large. They're too, if you were to think of like black pepper, maybe, coarse. Would I be right to that? Would black pepper should be coarse?
Yeah.
Like something like that. Does anybody have any questions so far on anything that I've explained? You have a question?
When you're calibrating the grinder to know the next batch will be at your desirable grain, it just one dose is enough.
Yeah.
And you try it again or
Yeah, exactly. So what I would do now is I would make one adjustment, pull my go shot, so I clean up the grinding chamber, and then I would pull another shot of espresso. I'll actually do that now for you, just to show you. So hopefully now, because I've made the size of the grains smaller, hopefully it's going to be more than 14 seconds. So you make a shot of espresso like before, place your 40 finger on the scales, press the tare button. So I have 17 grams of coffee in my basket currently, so I need to bring it down to 16. 16.2, that's good. Remember to level off your coffee grains. Using the correct grip. Using 13 to 15 kgs of pressure. Make sure the machine is flush. Lock in your porter filter. Reset the timer, press these two buttons here. Press your stop button at the same time you press your stop start button here. And because I've made these grains of coffee smaller, the espresso should be taking longer, but one adjustment sometimes isn't enough. 15 seconds. So I moved it in the right direction, but obviously 15 seconds is a long way from 30 seconds. You saw how fast that water travelled through your grains of coffee. So you can even tell by the flow of the espresso falling into the cup that shot of espresso is travelling in too quickly. So you know it's going to be weak, acidic, and it's going to be a little lighter in colour. It's hard to notice the difference in colour, but it will be lighter in colour. And obviously the grains of coffee in the basket are too large, even though we have 16 grams in our basket. So that's why it's really important that you weigh your grains, or you weigh your grams of coffee before we extract your espresso, and the timing as well. But do you think the amount of pressure that I'm using with my tamper is going to affect how fast or slowly the water is going to travel through my grains of coffee? Yeah, exactly. So let's say I didn't get a lot of sleep the night before, and I haven't had a coffee yet, and it's 7 a.m. in the morning, and I don't have a lot of energy, and I'm applying less than 13 kgs of pressure on my coffee grains. Let's say it's only 5 kgs of pressure, so I'm really tired. Do you think that will have an effect?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly, because the grains of coffee haven't been compressed. So the space in between each grain of coffee, even though the grains of coffee might actually be the right size, but because I haven't compressed them enough, that means that the space in between each grain of coffee is going to be too large, and then the water is going to travel too quickly. Let's say as the day goes on, my energy is increasing, I've had maybe 6 shots of espresso, and I'm using a lot of force. Let's say I'm using 25 kgs of pressure. I'm really hitting the coffee grains really firmly with the tamper. That means I've compressed the grains too much, and the space now is too small, and the water is going to travel too slowly. Even though the grains of coffee are the right size, they're going to travel, the water's traveling too slowly because I've compressed them too much. So that's why it's really important that everybody understands that we're using 13 to 15 kgs of pressure. That's why we have our practice tampers here. So you're applying the same amount of pressure every single time, and that we are obviously getting something close to 30 seconds. Because what can happen is when you're working in a coffee shop, there could be 3 different people working behind the coffee bar, and they're all applying different amounts of pressure. So then you're getting different times in the espresso, and that's obviously affecting the flavour, because when it's less than 28, obviously we're saying it's acidic, and then when it's over 32, it's over extracted, and it is a lot bitter. Does anybody else have any questions? No? Do you have a question, Anya?
The grinder, it just, you can just adjust the blades, or you can just adjust the dosage too.
Yeah, so what you can do as well, so the doses as well, you can reduce the time of each dose as well. So like this dose is currently on, what is it, 7.4. So let's say you reduce the time of dose 1. So you're getting 16 grams of coffee, but 16 grams of coffee could be too coarse. So you might have you have the correct weight. So you have 16 grams in your basket, but then obviously the grains of coffee are too large. So even though you have the right weight, they're the wrong size. So that's why, even though you might think like, oh, I'm going to reduce the time of the dose, and that will help the situation when it comes to the time of the espresso, but it actually it isn't actually having any kind of benefit to it because you're still having the grains of coffee too large, even though it's 16 grams. Is that okay? Alright. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about